June 7, 1942. Mid-Pacific Ocean, aboard the USS Enterprise, roughly 200 nautical miles northeast of Midway Atoll. The early morning light burned across the horizon, still tinged with the smoke of battle. Salt spray stunned the eyes of sailors leaning over the flight deck, where twisted fragments of planes and scattered bombs painted a grim mosaic of destruction. The carrier, one of the most storied in the Pacific, bore scars of fire and steel, splintered wood, scorched flight deck, and a patchwork of emergency repairs holding the ship together like a fragile skeleton. Chief Machinist's mate Samuel Jenkins, 34, a stocky man with grease-streaked overalls and a small tattoo of the United States Navy anchor on his forearm, squinted into the sun. His hands, black with oil, moved with surgical precision over a damaged engine manifold that threatened to immobilize the ship entirely. Sweat dripped under his NCO cap as he muttered to himself in clipped, urgent tones, a mixture of exhaustion and determination shaping his voice. "We don't have time for half measures," he said, tapping a makeshift bracket into place. Round him, sailors screamed, carrying lengths of piping, rolls of wiring, and hammering rivets into warped steel plates. The roar of the Pacific surrounded the Enterprise like a living entity, waves thrashing against the hull, the occasional crack of loose metal echoing through the corridors. The smell of fuel, salt, and singed insulation filled the air. Far above, aircraft still circled warily, some damaged, others untouched, awaiting clearance to land. Every deckhand, every engineer, felt the tension, aware that Japanese reconnaissance planes would soon patrol the area, eager to claim the carrier as a lost prize in the machinery spaces below deck. Sam crawled through a tangle of conduits and piping. The clatter of tools reverberated against bulkheads. Sparks flew as welders repaired ruptured sections of the ship's vital systems, and engineers measured currents in circuit boards salvaged from half-melted control panels. The vessel's propulsion system had taken the brunt of the assault, with 3 boilers out of service and 2 of 4 turbines damaged. Without improvisation, the Enterprise would drift like a cork in the open ocean, helpless to fight, to protect, or to move. Above deck, Lieutenant Commander Harold Thompson, the ship's operations officer, barked instructions to flight deck crews organizing the remaining aircraft. His uniform was streaked with soot and salt, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up. "Keep the fighters fueled and armed. We launch at first light," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos, a command tethering everyone's focus. Sam nodded as he overheard, knowing that every adjustment, every temporary fix below deck would translate into aircraft staying aloft, reconnaissance continuing, and the carrier remaining in the fight. The ingenuity of the repair crew was astonishing. Engineers fashioned clamps out of spare steel beams, jury-rigged piping, and welded broken hydraulic lines with precision that defied the ship's rolling motion. Sam, kneeling on a grated floor slick with water and oil, attached a bypass line to a damaged condenser. He grunted with effort, gripping the hot metal, aware that a misalignment could flood the machinery space and sink the ship round him. The hum of generators and pumps filled the room, a symphony of desperation and skill. Even as exhaustion threatened to overtake them, the crew pressed on. Mess cooks delivered cold coffee and tins of hardtack. Sailors passed tools without pause, and officers inspected every patchwork repair, offering terse words of encouragement. The tension was palpable. Failure was not an option. Sam's hands trembled slightly as he tightened the last bolt on the emergency manifold, knowing that the carrier's speed and possibly the lives of every man aboard depended on his next move outside. The horizon brightened further. A Japanese reconnaissance plane appeared, a distant silhouette against the rising sun. The men froze momentarily, eyes tracking the lone enemy aircraft. A collective inhale, a silent prayer. Then they returned to work, moving faster, knowing that the appearance of the plane could mean attack or simply observation, but either way, they had to finish repairs before the threat turned deadly. By mid-morning, the first engine roared to life. The Enterprise shuddered, groaning under the strain of damaged turbines and hastily patched steam lines. Sam wiped his brow, his forearms slick with oil and sweat, and allowed himself a brief glance at the flight deck above. Planes were being rearmed, launched fighters spiraling into the air, while the carrier herself began moving again. Her speed far below peak, but enough to maintain operational readiness. Somewhere, far across the Pacific, Japanese intelligence recorded reports of the Enterprise still operational. Their analysts had expected the carrier to be out of action for months, a prize already claimed by the fury of battle. Instead, the ship patched, improvised, and held together by the skill and determination of men like Sam Jenkins was still alive, still fighting, still defying expectation. The astonishment of the enemy would later become legend, a testament not to one ship or one aircraft, but to the ingenuity, courage, and relentless dedication of the men below deck, who refused to let the war steal their carrier from them. Sam leaned back for a moment, listening to the vibration of the turbines, the hum of electricity restored, and the distant thrum of aircraft engines. He allowed a brief smile, weary but victorious, before diving back into the bowels of the ship. The Enterprise was far from fully repaired, but it was alive, and that was enough for now. June 8, 1942, USS Enterprise, somewhere between Midway and the Hawaiian Islands. Below deck, the metallic scent of heated steel mingled with the acrid tang of fuel. Sam Jenkins crouched beside a ruptured steam line, the edges of the metal jagged from the earlier battle damage. Sparks from a portable torch danced across his goggles, illuminating the grime-streaked faces of sailors crowded in the cramped space. Every movement had to be deliberate. One wrong angle, one missed weld, and the already compromised systems could fail catastrophically. Make it fit. Sam, make it hold, shouted Chief Electrician Thomas Riley, a weary man with nervous energy and quick hands, passing a coil of copper wire that would serve as a temporary circuit bypass. Sam adjusted the brace, hammering it into place as the ship rolled under the gentle sway of the ocean. The constant motion made every tool feel twice as heavy. Above them, the thrum of the engines was uneven, a harsh reminder of how much damage the carrier had sustained. Crews above deck ran with urgency, replacing broken deck planking and clearing debris from the flight path. Every plane that managed to take off under these conditions was a testament to the invisible army. Below the mechanics, the engineers, the men who refused to let the Enterprise die in the Pacific. A sudden shudder ran through the ship as a rogue swell lifted the hull. Sam stumbled, catching himself on a support beam, the torch nearly grazing his arm. Round him, sailors exchanged grim looks, but no words. There was no time for complaints, no room for hesitation. Improvisation was their only option, using salvaged steel piping. Sam created a makeshift bracket to stabilize a compromised steam manifold. It was crude, far from the precision of peacetime engineering, but in war, sometimes good enough meant survival. Meanwhile, Riley adjusted the temporary wiring to the auxiliary generators. Sparks asked briefly, then died success. The lights flickered to life, casting stark shadows across the cramped machinery bay. The momentary illumination revealed another crew member, Seaman First Class John Johnny Perez, sweating as he measured the pressure gauges, noting each anomaly in a small notebook. His youthful face, pale beneath the grime, reflected both fear and determination. Time moved differently in the belly of the ship. Minutes stretched into hours as Sam and his team labored without pause. The distant hum of aircraft above was both motivation and reminder of what was at stake. Every repair was a thread in the fragile tapestry holding the Enterprise together. At one point, a small fire ignited near an electrical panel. Without hesitation, Sam grabbed a nearby extinguisher, dousing the flames before they could spread. "Keep your heads," he barked, voice hoarse, hands trembling slightly from exhaustion. Each moment carried the weight of lives and the fate of the ship. By late afternoon, progress was tangible. The main engines, though still operating at reduced capacity, were stabilizing. Auxiliary pumps hummed with renewed strength. Keeping critical systems operational, Sam allowed himself a brief pause, wiping the sweat and grime from his brow. As he surveyed the organized chaos surrounding him, every sailor, every mechanic, was part of a synchronized dance, improvising with ingenuity under the relentless pressure of the open ocean and the looming threat of Japanese reconnaissance. Outside, the sea shimmered under the late sun. A distant plane silhouette appeared on the horizon, but the carrier was moving, engines humming in a rhythm that almost mimicked a heartbeat. The repair crew had done the impossible, restoring partial functionality to a ship that many had assumed would be out of the fight for months. The human cost was visible. Bruised shoulders, cut hands, and strained backs told a story of exhaustion and sacrifice. Yet, in their eyes, there was a quiet pride, a shared understanding that their labor had bought time, not just for the Enterprise, but for every squadron still in the air and every sailor still on deck. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the flight deck, Sam Jenkins stood upright, listening to the uneven but steady hum of the turbines. A small smile flickered across his face. The ship was alive. The planes could take off again. And in the eyes of every sailor, mechanic, and engineer aboard, the impossible had been achieved not through magic, but through relentless skill, improvisation, and determination. June 10, 1942. Mid-Pacific, USS Enterprise underway. The morning sun glinted off the repaired flight deck as aircraft engines roared to life. Fighters and dive bombers lined up, ready for takeoff despite the carrier's scars from the previous battle on deck. Lieutenant Commander Harold Thompson inspected the flight crews, nodding sharply at pilots and gunners. "Keep it tight. We are not out of this yet," he barked, voice firm but tinged with relief. Below deck, Chief Machinists made Sam Jenkins emerge from the machinery spaces, all streaked and exhausted. His hands bore the grime of countless hours welding, patching, and jury rigging. He paused for a moment, listening to the steady hum of the turbines and the distant roar of aircraft engines preparing for launch. Each sound was a pulse of life, proof that their efforts had kept the carrier in the fight. The Japanese, expecting the Enterprise to be sidelined for months, had underestimated the ingenuity and determination of her crew. Reports would later show surprise and confusion among enemy intelligence. How could the carrier, heavily damaged, still project power across the Pacific? But for Sam and the crew, the answer was simple: relentless work, improvisation, and an unwillingness to let their ship die. Above deck, the first squadron launched. Corsairs and dauntless dive bombers climbed into the sky, their wings catching sunlight as they formed a protective umbrella over the fleet. Thompson watched, pride etched on his face. Each plane represented not only firepower, but the cumulative effort of every sailor, every mechanic, every engineer who had labored below deck. Sam watched from the hangar deck, noting minor hisses from patched steam lines and flickering lights from emergency generators. Each anomaly was a reminder of how close they had come to catastrophe. Yet, the Enterprise moved steadily through the waves, her engine thrumming, her aircraft taking flight, her crew standing vigilant. The impossible had been achieved. A vessel expected to be out of action for months had returned to operational status in weeks on deck. Sailors repaired minor damage and reinforced sections of the flight deck still scarred from fire. And bomb strikes, tools clanged, voices shouted instructions, and the smell of fresh paint and lubricants mingled with the salty air. Sam's hands shook slightly from fatigue as he assisted a fellow machinist with the final pressure. Gauge calibration, every turn of a wrench, every tightened bolt, was a thread weaving the carrier back into the tapestry of war. In the distance, Japanese reconnaissance planes scanned the horizon, noting the Enterprise's unexpected movements. The carrier's speed was reduced, but it was enough. It was a message of resilience, a signal that American ingenuity and perseverance could defy expectations as evening approached. The flight deck quieted for a brief moment. Pilots reviewed flight plans and engineers checked systems once more. Sam leaned against a bulkhead, listening to the gentle hum of restored turbines and the distant calls of sailors on deck. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him. Yet there was satisfaction in knowing their work had tangible results. The Enterprise, battered but alive, sailed onward. Her planes would strike again. Reconnaissance would continue, and the Pacific would know that the carrier was far from defeated. The determination of Sam Jenkins and his fellow repair crews had ensured that, even in the face of overwhelming damage, one ship and the men aboard her could still influence the course of a battle. And as the sun set over the Pacific horizon, casting long shadows over the flight deck, the carrier moved steadily forward, a living testament to the ingenuity, courage, and perseverance of the men who refused to surrender to circumstance. June 12, 1942. Somewhere over the Pacific, Japanese reconnaissance reports reach command centers in Tokyo and Rabaul. Intelligence officers scrolled through the latest sightings. The USS Enterprise, visibly damaged, just days before at Midway, was underway again, her air group operational, her deck cleared of debris, her speed sufficient to launch coordinated strikes. A stunned hush fell over the room as officers and analysts compared photographs and ship logs. "This cannot be correct," muttered Lieutenant Commander Hiroshi Tanaka, examining aerial reconnaissance images. She was heavily damaged. She should be in dry dock for months. The Japanese had underestimated the resilience of American shipyards, crews, and ingenuity. They had assumed the Enterprise's absence would give them breathing room in the Pacific, a chance to regroup after the costly engagements at Midway. Instead, they faced a carrier that had been patched together with improvised repairs, jury-rigged systems, and the tireless work of mechanics like Sam Jenkins back aboard the Enterprise. Life returned to a rhythm governed by necessity and vigilance. Sam moved through the engine rooms, checking each repaired system and recording pressure and temperature readings in precise detail. Every minor anomaly had to be noted, every improvised fix monitored. The crew knew that Japanese intelligence would soon attempt to gauge their effectiveness, and failure now could invite disaster. Above deck, Lieutenant Commander Harold Thompson coordinated with squadron leaders, planning strikes and reconnaissance missions. The pilots, aware of their carrier's recent battle scars, approached each mission with a mix of caution and renewed confidence, knowing that the ship they depended on had defied the odds. Aircraft roared into the sky, and the carrier's anti-aircraft guns were manned and ready, a testament to the crew's resilience and the thoroughness of their repairs. Sam paused to observe the flight deck, noting the mechanics adjusting propellers, checking fuel lines, and clearing minor debris from planes preparing for takeoff. The hum of turbines, the chatter of sailors, and the rhythmic clang of tools on metal were a symphony of survival. Each sound reinforced the fact that the Enterprise was operational, alive, and ready for combat in Tokyo. Reports of the Enterprise's rapid return to action created a ripple of disbelief. Japanese planners recalculated strategies, realizing that the carrier they had assumed neutralized would continue to influence Pacific operations. The intelligence notes were frank. American crews were capable of improvisation beyond expectation. Their resourcefulness had effectively rewritten the operational timeline. On the deck of the Enterprise, as twilight painted the horizon in shades of gold and crimson, Sam Jenkins allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The ship had survived. The aircraft were aloft. And the crew tired, battle-worn, and grease-streaked had achieved what seemed impossible. Their work had not only restored a ship, but had challenged assumptions about the limits of human ingenuity in wartime. The men understood the significance. The Enterprise was more than steel and machinery. It was a symbol of determination, an embodiment of skill and perseverance. And as the stars emerged over the Pacific, Sam Jenkins and his fellow mechanics stood vigilant, ready to ensure that the carrier remained a formidable presence, a thorn in the side of the Japanese Navy, and a living legend of the Battle of Midway. By nightfall, the USS Enterprise sailed on, engine steady, aircraft prepared, crew alert, and the impossible restoration of a battle-worn carrier in weeks instead of months achieved. The Japanese, astounded from afar, could only adjust their strategies and acknowledge a new reality. American ingenuity and resolve were forces to be reckoned with.